Agustin, thank you so much. What a great pleasure it is to be here, Maria Luisa. I feel like we have become fast friends just in the day we've gotten to know each other. One of the great pleasures of traveling is the experience not only of seeing new things and meeting new people, but learning about common experiences. And I just want to share one because I actually think the Museo d'Arte Ponce and the Museum of Modern Art have a lot in common. They share a building by Edward Durrell Stone. They share a creation where a leading individual and family gave birth to an institution that then becomes part of a community and enters the world as something much larger than it began. And more importantly, they share a common spirit, a belief that works of art can be transforming, that an institution can become more than simply a home to objects, but can become a social nexus where communities can find shared experiences, where generations can learn from the creations of the past, and where common bounds can be established and can grow and prosper. So what I thought I would do this evening briefly is introduce you to the Museum of Modern Art and the transformation that took place there in 2004. I'll do this really by looking at four aspects of the museum. First, its early history, how it came to be. Then its collection, which is at the heart of what we are as an institution. Followed by the 2004 campaign, which was a campaign that really was about reinventing the museum, and I suspect shares a lot in common with what has happened here in Ponce, and finally the results of all of that, a new museum of modern art. The museum was actually the brainchild of three remarkable women. In the upper left, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, in the middle, Lily P. Bliss, and then the far right, Mary Quinn. These three women in 1927 believed that New York City, which was to be a city of the future, needed an institution that could be of the future, that could share with the city the belief in the creative power of individual artists. And so they asked Alfred Barr, the man in the spectacles in the center, to go abroad and spend 2 years thinking about what kind of museum he would want to create. And he came back in 1929 and said, I have an idea for a museum. And these three women then got some of their friends, you see pictures of them, collectors of modern art in New York City, and together they created the Museum of Modern Art. And that museum started actually in rented office space in a building called the Heckscher Building, which is to the left of this slide, right next to the Plaza Hotel. And we opened our doors on November 9th, 1929. Those of you with good historical memories will know that that was exactly 10 days after the great stock market crash in October. Not necessarily the most promising time to open a museum, no more so than trying to raise $28 million in the middle of an economic crisis. And Maria Luisa, I'm betting on you that you will not only raise all of that money, you'll raise even more. What happened is in the first month of the museum's existence, in 4,000 square feet in this office space, over 100,000 people came. And it gave the institution enough belief in its future and its potential that the Rockefeller family leased the museum in 1932, this brownstone, on 53rd Street. And the address, 11 West 53rd, has become our address, although the brownstone is long gone. But what happened was this idea, this experiment, this magnificent enterprise of 1929, by 1932, had become something established with its own home, with a place that it could consider as its center. And it grew very quickly. People supported it. It found in its public an amazing commitment to the shared belief that modern art could be every bit as exciting, every bit as important as the art of the past. And with that came the belief that the museum needed its own home. So in 1936, Edward Durrell Stone became partner with Philip Goodwin and designed this building for us in New York. Now, there were several important aspects of this building which actually Ponce shares. First of all, Stone believed that the museum should not be separated from the city. If you think about some of the great historical museums, like the Metropolitan Museum in New York or the Prado in Madrid, you enter the museum by going up a flight of steps. And what that does is it separates the museum from the street. It turns the museum, if you wish, into a sanctuary. And those museums used the classical language of architecture with columns and pendentives and all sorts of architectural details to distinguish them from the contemporary architecture of the day. Stone wanted a building that would be of the people and for the people and on the street. So our entrance was directly on the street. The language of the architecture was the language of high modernism, a language that was subsequently to become the common language of architecture throughout New York City. But much more importantly, you can see here with those perforated circles on the roof of the museum, the same kind of skylighting system that was going to be so elegantly done in Ponce some 30 years later. By 1984, the museum had grown again. It built the tower that you see in the left-hand side of this slide. The museum owns the lower floors of the tower. The upper floors were sold as condominiums. You can see that the facade of the building has been changed a little bit. To our immediate right, that dark building was added by Philip Johnson, a famous architect who was on the board of trustees of the museum. And the success of the museum meant that essentially every 10 years we had to find a way of increasing our size, changing our architectural footprint, and responding to both a growing collection and a growing public. To give you an idea of the collection, we began with our first gift in 1931, 2 years after we were founded, of 100 works of art. By 1984, when this image was taken, the museum had about 50,000 objects, and today, 25 years later, we have 120,000 objects. So the scale of expansion has been incredibly dramatic. Now, the reason the museum exists is actually because of an idea, which is very much reflected in this diagram that Alfred Barr, our founding director, did around 1934. The idea was that the Museum of Modern Art should be a place that could help its public understand the complexity of modern art. And so what Barr tried to do in this diagram was to trace all of the sources and origins of modern art and to put them in some kind of order, intellectually at least, that could be understood by a public that would have been utterly unfamiliar with modern art. And in order to make this diagram real, what the museum did was to acquire works of art that would reflect each of the important moments in the history of modern art, and that could lay out for its public a way of understanding modern art. Not the only way of understanding, but a way of understanding. And to present that argument as cogently and as clearly and as forcefully as it could.